All right, welcome to the Imperial Mastering recording and production Q&A. I'm Colin Davis, and I should probably just give a little introduction and then go from there. And I'm also running Facebook right now off of my Colin Davis Facebook profile. So I have, well, first of all, I've been recording professionally since 1996, and I run Imperial Mastering. I mainly work with metal bands, but also other styles of music. And from time to time, I will write articles or do some kind of video to give advice to often musicians, pre-production advice or how to get better recordings, how to prepare their mixes for mastering, things like this. And the idea here is that I haven't done that in a while, and so I thought I would start doing Zoom calls from time to time and invite people in and be able to ask questions, just as a public service, just to help you improve your recordings. And so this can be anything from pre-production to the actual recording process, to recording gear, to how to prepare for going into a pro studio. It could be about live sound. It could be about mixing, mastering. Anything that's in that domain is what I want to talk about. But because this is a new program here, and people may not know that I'm doing this, I sort of thought that I would do a presentation about pre-production, and because, well, here let me start with who am I talking to, basically, and I got some notes here because I haven't done this presentation in a while. So basically, we have the solo artist, or perhaps like a duo, who's recording everything at home. And they're probably using a drum program to everything's being done in the computer. That's one type of artist. Another is the traditional band that will record everything in a pro recording studio. And so for them, it's more about pre-production. It's more about preparing themselves, and also selecting the right engineer. I mean, sometimes there's you're limited to who's available regionally, but then there's the band who will record locally, and then maybe they'll send it off for mixing and mastering to somebody else, someone around the world. And this is another situation. And then there's the band who will record some instruments in a pro studio, like probably drums, and then maybe somebody in the band has the skills or has a small home recording studio, and so they're going to then track perhaps guitars, bass, maybe even vocals, and then either give it back to that engineer to mix it or send it off somewhere else. So these are the kinds of scenarios that people find themselves in, and I want to talk about those kind of scenarios and how to prepare from those different positions. But first, I want to basically this is the question I have written down here: is do I have to record an album? Or can I record just an EP? Should I record an EP or a single or maybe a couple or 3 songs at once? And what's the best way to approach recording in terms of the release itself? Well, if you are, obviously, if you're a signed professional touring band, and you've got a budget coming from the record label or whatever the situation, you're probably still in the you're probably still recording full length albums, 10-song albums, albums that are 35 minutes or more. And this is probably the situation because, well, one of the big reasons is because of the the retail market, and record labels are going to want to have a full length album that they can sell at full length retail price. And if you record an EP, then that's a lower. It's like you end up spending in the old days, you would end up spending, if you did a shorter album, not only would you not be able to sell it for full retail price, or a lot of labels do trades, and so then you wouldn't have that kind of parity with trades. But the amount of time and work and money that goes into producing a recording, you might as well produce a full length album. So that's still going on, and if you're in that position, if you're you're at that tier, then that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be recording a full length album. If you are not signed, if you are not, you're not at that level, let's say, or maybe you were at that level and now you're not at that level, or maybe you're just, just so much is going on now. But you might want to approach it in a different way, because if you put out, with the way music is marketed now and with people's attention spans and everything, if you don't have a marketing campaign behind your album, what's going to happen when let's say you're a local or regional artist, maybe you do some touring, but it's within your own continent mainly, and you don't have a label behind you, or your label is small and they don't have a big budget for marketing. What's going to happen when your album comes out? Yeah, you're going to get some publicity. It's going to be on some websites for a second, and then it's just going to disappear. And it's going to depend on a lot of self-promotion. So so basically, how many of your songs are going to just get lost? How many of your songs are just going to, the whole album is just, this is just the way things are now. It just comes and goes. So unless you have that touring to keep the attention going, unless you have the marketing and the touring to keep it going, well, then albums have a tendency of just kind of coming and going. So why, and it's also true that many albums, let's say a 10-song album, would have several songs that they're kind of filler, right? Now, if you have 10 amazing songs, and this is your first album, and you've had all these years of working everything out, and you've got it all together as a masterpiece, well, then you need to put that out for sure. But what if your band has, just 3 or 4 really great songs that they're really happy with, and, those are going to be the main ones that you're going to play live? Why not just record those? Why not just record 4 or 5 songs? Why not record 4 songs, your best 4 songs, and then take some of your budget and make music videos make 2 like really good music videos, and 2 others that are something more abstract, or like a lyric video or something like that. Because that's another aspect. Traditionally you would have one album with 10 songs on it, say, and then you would have 1 or maybe 2 music videos for the whole album. Well, you could just put out 4 songs and then you could put out 2 music videos, or you could put out, like I said, 4 actual videos. Maybe 1 or 2 of them is really pro, and then the rest are something more simple, because you kind of have to make something in video form now. People are consuming audio on video platforms now. So that's how the lyric video came out. Because, for example, with YouTube, you can't just upload audio. You have to have some video component. So people make lyric videos because they're cheap, and then that puts you into the video format. Well, I just think that is, and this is not my idea. This is something that veterans of the music industry are talking about all the time now. And if you're not in the pro signed touring artist category and you're stuck in the 10 song or 12 song, the full length album format and everything that goes with that, seems to me and a lot of other people that if you're going into a pro recording studio, you might as well record a good handful of songs at a time. And then you can just kind of slowly put one music video or single out, and then 3 or 6 months later put another one out, and you can stretch the marketing of your music out for much longer, and you can keep getting publicity every time you put a new music video out. So that is another, I think, very viable and smart option, and a lot of people should consider doing that. Then there's even a more micro format of that, and that's just produce a single or produce 2 singles, let's say, and make music videos for both of those and put one out now and then put another one out in 6 months. That, or just only produce singles, and that's all you produce. Now, if you're only going to produce singles, you probably have a situation where you are, somebody in the band is a recording engineer, at some level, and you can do all the recording yourself. Because electronic music is definitely like this, where everything's in the box, so to speak, and there's there's 1 or 2 people in the band, and they just put everything out that way. They do everything at home, and they just put out a single, and they put out another single, and they just put out singles. Well, you can do that in rock and metal and other formats or other styles as well. But you probably don't want to. I mean, maybe you have a recording engineer locally who does everything and does everything really good, and you can just book time with them, let's say every 6 months, and do another single. You could do it that way. But I think most people who are probably considering doing singles are people that have some recording capability, and that's basically who I'm talking to today. So that was one thing to kind of get out of the way, is how that it's okay to record singles, or we would call them demos, 3 or 4 songs. It doesn't have to be a demo, but 3 or 4 song release, or a 5 or 6 song release, which is typical, which is called an EP. Those are very viable and smart options with the way you have to market yourself, and you have to constantly put material out to stay relevant. One more thing I might add to that is before this idea came about, people were keeping themselves relevant by putting out an album, and then they would just release a new music video off the album. So you can still do that, but I'm just saying there are these other options, and so that is a definitely a viable way to go. Now, in all situations, I'm reading from my notes here, you should pre-produce your songs in the computer with canned drums, with programmed drums, or at least with a click and a guitar track to get your tempos right. Use a different project for each song and design your tempo track. fill it in with scratch guitar, scratch bass, keyboards, vocals, whatever you want, so that you can do pre-production, so that you can design your song. But what I'm talking about here is using a computer program, using whatever it is. I mean, if you're in a Mac, it could be as something that's like free, like GarageBand. Probably though, if you're in the metal world and you want metal drums, well, then you're going to be using some kind of more advanced program for doing your drums, your pre-production drums. And so you might want something like TuneTrack, like Easy Drummer or Superior Drummer or something that competes with that. And so you might want a platform that's better than just GarageBand or something. So, for example, Reaper is very popular. Reaper is a $60 recording program that is as good as Pro Tools or Logic or any of these, is Cubase or any of these others. It's got its own workflow, but it's still based on the old analog way of recording, and so it's intuitive, and there's a huge knowledge base out there, so you can learn the program, and so you could get Reaper for $60. Then you could buy Easy Drummer, let's say TuneTrack Easy Drummer. It's, by the time you're done with it, it's like, with what you need, probably $200 to $250. But then you have your pre-production drum program there. You can get an audio interface, such as like a little Focusrite Scarlett thing or something like this, that you can plug your guitar, bass, vocal mics into. You can get something like that for $150, $200. And even with a pair of headphones or just cheesy speakers, you have your pre-production studio there. The big issue is learning the program. So probably anyone that would be listening to something like this is probably already at that stage where, I know I have a little home studio, I'm already using these things and all of that. Or I use, you have some variation of that. But, okay, and here's an issue though. When you want to pre-produce your songs, or let me back up even more. Why do you need to pre-produce your songs? Well, if you're going to record everything yourself, kind of pre-production and recording and production kind of can merge together. If you're going to a recording studio, you want to pre-produce your songs. In other words, demo your songs so that you can work out a lot of the things that will catch you up when you get into the studio. You basically, not only will it help you rehearse your tracks and work out everything with your playing, but I mean, there's just, with the vocal parts, okay? Yeah, so the singer has been singing at band practice, but you didn't really notice that, this line is getting jammed up, there's too many words in this line, or this part didn't have any vocals, but now we realize it probably needs to have vocals. And there's a lot of things that you're going to run into in the studio that you would rather run into in pre-production and work that out. Also, guitar tone, what your guitar tone is going to be, what amps you're going to use, or how somebody's playing the bass, or maybe, just how everybody is approaching everything. If it's a traditional band situation, then everybody is familiar with what everyone's doing to some degree because of band practice. But people are not really fine-tuned into exactly what everybody's doing. So when they go to the recording studio, everyone's kind of finding out, oh, that's what you were doing. Oh, that's what you were doing. And then the recording engineer's going, yeah, you really weren't playing that part very well. You really needed to practice that part and work that part out. Well, now you're in the recording studio and you don't have much time, and what are you going to do? You go, oh, I'll fake it. I'll punch in that part. Okay, we'll get it done. But then you have like a weak spot in your song. So the better thing to do is to pre-produce all your songs. Secondly, you want to settle on the best tempo for your song. There's the tempo that you play at band practice. There's the probably faster tempo that you play live. And then there's the tempo that your song needs to be on your recording. And depending on the style, maybe it'll be pretty close. If it's like extreme brutal death metal, like Hate Eternal or something like that, maybe your recording tempo is just almost the same as your live tempo. It's basically as fast as you can play clean. But for a lot of other subgenres of metal and other styles, you want to record the tempo that really makes the song, where the song grooves the best, where the whole approach sounds the best, and where the band is not totally stressed out with their capabilities, to where you can track cleanly. And this is a big mistake that metal bands make, is they play too fast in the studio a lot of times. And they're like, okay, well, this is, this is on tape now. This is for real. This is going to be here forever. And we're a fast band. And so we really, we want to make sure that we record everything the way we would like to hear it. But then you end up stretching your capacities, and you end up loosening the quality. The band sounds looser, and the quality goes down. And with the faster you play, then either the lighter that you have to play on some instruments, like bass or drums, or just the more likely it is you're going to make mistakes. Everything starts to get crowded. So, for example, with an extreme metal band that might, a listener of your music cannot tell the difference and is not impressed more by, let's say, a song that's recorded at 230 beats per minute or 240 beats per minute, and one that's recorded at 220 or 225 or something like that. Those are all very fast tempos. A band that can play 230 beats per minute, 16th notes, drums and stuff, they can play that. Maybe they do play that live. But if they play that at that speed, which is their max in the studio, they're just going to make everything sound kind of messy. And if they would just back it off from 235 or 230 down to 225, right, or 220, still going to be raging fast, but you're going to have more groove in there. You're going to have a little more space. The band isn't maxed out. The whole recording is going to sound tighter, and the person who's listening to the album in their car, they don't listen to this, and they don't pull out CDs and go, oh, let's see which one's a little bit faster. They don't compare that way. In my band, VILE, I'd say the first VILE album, where the fastest song was 190 beats per minute, is still, to a lot of people, their favorite album. They consider that the classic one. That's the one that's the. Then there's people that like all the albums, but the first two are probably the most Oh, well, the first three are the most popular. There's only four VILE studio recordings, and the fourth one, I think, where I kind of went in a melodic metal direction. I think a lot of people that liked brutal death metal weren't so happy with that one, but the first three are all definitely brutal death metal, and they're all fast. And but there's kind of like a cult following around the first album, and that album, for standards of speed, is slow. People hear double bass going, it's at 190, but it's got a groove. And then there's the next album where we're playing at 220, 225 in parts or something like that. And that's got its fans too, but people don't say that album is better because it's faster. And it's the same for all bands. So really, you want to basically settle on the tempo or tempos, because a lot of songs have tempo changes that are appropriate for the song, that fit the song best, not just, how fast can we play. That's just going to give you a messier recording. Well, you need this pre-production time to be able to figure this out. You have to be able to, pre-production starts at band practice. Let's go to the traditional band that's still having band practice. And I know a lot of people in metal are not even in that. They're kind of just doing everything at home. But in the traditional band practice, pre-production starts at rehearsal. It goes to when you start to record your rehearsal on some little recorder or on your phone or whatever. And then the drummer's listening back to the recordings and playing them and going, okay, I see how I played it before. And then, over time, settling on tempos. And the tempos are kind of just whatever the songwriter and the drummer figure out and what it feels right. But the next step of this is to start recording into the computer, into a recording program, and start analyzing your tempos. So at first, you can just record into the computer live, and you can have the computer analyze the tempos, and then you can look and see, oh, here's our tempos. And you'll see them kind of going all over the place, but you'll see, all right, we start out the intros kind of here at, whatever it is, 195 or something like that. And then by the time we get into the verse and we start going over here, where maybe we upped it by 3 beats per minute. And then when we got to the chorus, or whatever, however you talk about the parts of songs, because a lot of times metal is not traditional in, verse, intro, verse, chorus, bridge, that kind of stuff. But you'll see, if you have the computer analyze your tempo of your usually something percussive of a drummer playing, you'll kind of see where your tempos are at. And then what you can do is you can kind of go, okay, so we were fluctuating, but what we intended to play was, 195. Let's just keep this whole part at 195. Then we did up it a couple beats per minute when we went to the next part, but we don't really need to do that. Let's just keep that at 195. Then when we get over here to what's considered the chorus or whatever, then it sped up like a good 3 or 4 or 5 beats per minute. Let's definitely keep that, because that adds more energy, and we want tempos to fluctuate because we want dynamics in the song. But then when we come down into this middle section here, there's like a drop down part, we're going to slow down the tempo, and let's see where we were. And you kind of just go through your parts, and you figure out what your tempos should be. And you do this in a separate project for every song. because if you're going to be drawing out a tempo map, some styles are one tempo throughout the whole song. You could feasibly do all your songs in one project and just kind of have it draw it up and down depending on. But most songs in the metal world have multiple tempos, and you probably want to simplify everything and put it all into each song has its own project. So another way of doing this is, and this is the way I wrote how I would settle on tempos before going into the recording studio, is I would basically write riffs to a metronome, like in my phone or probably in the 90s and 2000s, just a little metronome, a little battery-powered metronome. And I would basically, I would just jam the riffs and I would figure out what tempo they are. Then, before I started using tempo tracks, which all recording programs have now, where you can draw up or down the tempo as like at bar 32, we're going to draw up the tempo over here. When we get over to this bar 64, we're going to draw down the tempo over here. All recording programs can do that now. But in the older days, I would just figure out what the tempo should be on my metronome, and then I would record into the computer the metronome, click, 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 and I would just punch in on a track, and I would punch in the clicks. Then I would lay down the guitar part, and I would just have a piece of paper. I would work it all out with my little metronome, and I would just write down, part 1, this tempo, part 2, this tempo, then part 3, this tempo. I kind of figure it out. And then I would record the click into the computer as an audio track, just with a cheapo mic or whatever, just next to the metronome. And then I would lay down some scratch tracks. I would just put a microphone in front of a practice amp, plug that into an audio interface, put it into the computer, and I would write my songs that way, with the click track and with me just playing a scratch track. Before that, I didn't do all that stuff. I would just, go practice with the drummer and didn't do it. But by the time I got to the third album, so this would have been 2005. That's when I started doing it this other way. And so let's say, for example, you're the songwriter and your drummer's around, and you go to band practice with your drummer every week or whatever it is, twice a week. Who knows? These days, every once in a while maybe. But you want to give your drummer a pre-produced, click and scratch guitar track and have them jam to that. And then you want to get feedback from them saying, hey, I think it felt a little slow here or whatever. Then you want to go to band practice with them, have them listen to this pre-produced click and scratch track in their headphones, and have band practice with them and take notes. And what you'll do by going back and forth over time is you will settle on the right tempos, because what feels good with you at your desk is not going to feel good at band practice. At band practice, you're going to want it a lot of times to be faster. So you need to kind of figure out what it should be. You will eventually figure out what the tempos for all the parts should be. And that program, let's say it's a Reaper program or Logic or whatever, for, song 1, you will have that done. And you'll have your drawn out click track, and you don't want to be going up and down one BPM up here, 1 BPM down here. You want to settle on basically, you want to probably 3 BPMs is probably where you would do changes at that kind of resolution. Maybe 2, probably 3, 4, 5 kind of resolution. And so then there you go. So song 1's done. So you have a click track and you have your scratch guitar track. Do that for all your songs. And the next step of this, and that's where a lot of people are at. Truthfully, a lot of people are not really good with computers, but they can figure out how to record a a scratch guitar track with a with a practice amp mic'd up or with a guitar simulator program to a click. Even if they can't program drums and all that, and maybe even using Tune Track where you kind of drag and drop drum parts. Maybe that, because that's actually a little complex too. You can at least do this. You can at least get to the level to where you can figure out what the tempos should be and have a scratch guitar or bass track or whatever it is. That's the level of production, pre-production, that you kind of have to get to that level. Then with that, you're going to go to the recording studio. Believe me, the recording engineer is going to be like, this is great. You have worked out your tempos for all 5 of your songs or 10 of your songs or whatever it is. You've provided me with a MIDI track with all the tempos built in and a scratch guitar track. Well, that's what he's going to use to start all his programs, and that's what he's going to feed to the drummer when he's tracking drums, and everything's going to go from there. That level of pre-production is necessary at this stage. It's necessary to record to a click track to get a clean recording these days, and it's necessary to do this kind of work ahead of time to get that going. The next level of it is where you put pre-programmed drums, like I said, Tune Track or GGD or whatever the program is you're using. And it's important not to use programs that are just, like audio loops, like you're just dragging pre-recorded audio loops. You want to have a program that's actually MIDI-based. You want a MIDI-based drum program. And like Easy Drummer or Superior Drummer. And I don't know what all the other competitors are out there. Those are the ones I use. And now if you have a drummer, though, your drummer is in your band, the drummer might be a little bit offended if they're like, hey, you're doing all the drum programming in the computer, and where do I come in? Am I just the slave and I just play whatever the computer says I should play when it's time to play live or to record? Well, no, it doesn't have to be that way. It could be that way because a lot of drummers are busy, and a lot of drummers are like, great, use some pre-programmed beats some other drummer wrote, and then when I go to the studio or play live, I'll adapt it a little bit and I'll put my own flair in there. And a lot of drummers will be fine with that. And then it just makes everything more efficient. But the other option is that the drummer actually comes over to your house and you work on the parts together. And instead of just dragging, Nick Barker or whoever drummer's parts into your program, you might do that, but then your drummer will be sitting with you and be like, I wouldn't even play the cymbals that way. I would do this. Okay, great. Well, you can draw those in, and you can work with the drummer to design the drums in the computer. And if you want to have that level of creativity with the drummer, you can still pre-produce all the drums with a MIDI drum program and have your drummer part of the whole thing. And in fact, I've heard other engineers talk about this, you could even avoid going to the recording studio, and you and your drummer could work out all the parts MIDI, and then you could just use the MIDI drums because they sound better than what a lot of intermediate level recording engineers can record, and or even advanced recording engineers can record. They sound so good now. You could just work with your drummer, record all your drums. Just use the MIDI drums as your pro drums, as your recorded drums. And then when you play live, then your drummer gets his rocks off by playing live, and he can change it up a little bit or whatever. But he helped you design those drum parts. Those are his parts. He just didn't play them in the studio. And some drummers want to play them in the studio. They want to do that. So, okay, great. So then you guys are going to, put out more money, and you're going to put that effort into it, and you're going to go into the studio and you're going to do that. And I think most bands are probably going to do that. But it is an option for the drummer and the songwriter to get together and just program all the drums and then just keep those. So that's another part of it. And even if you're not going to keep those drums, it can be part of your pre-production. So that's another level of pre-production. Now, also, if the further you go with your home studio, pre-production stuff, to record guitar parts, you don't even have to necessarily record 2 guitar tracks, just 1 guitar track maybe. They give you the chance to work out all the guitar parts, 1 bass track, and scratch vocals. You can put together a pretty nice kind of basic kind of demo version of your songs with just 1, or might as well do 2 guitar parts, put your solo in there, your bass, and a scratch vocal that sounds decent. Punch it into where it's decent and make a decent pre-production version of all your songs. That will be the time in which you will figure out all the little areas in which things aren't working, and you can go as elaborate as you want, or you can keep it as simple as you want. But then when you go into the studio, then a lot of first of all, you're going to have more confidence, and everybody's going to know where everybody is. All those parts that were kind of shaky have been worked out. So doing this pre-production thing is a very good idea. And now let me just move on now to where you have a situation where you will, if you are going to do some of the tracks yourself and then the rest are going to be done in a recording studio, like you're going to record drums at the recording studio, and you or somebody else in the band is going to record guitars, bass, and maybe even vocals, then you're moving into an area where your knowledge of recording is deeper than just the area of pre-production. Because pretty much every musician can fairly quickly get up to speed to where they are able to do, design a tempo track, lay down a scratch guitar or bass track, but, do some easy drum programming. Pretty much anybody that uses computers at all can get to that level pretty quickly. The next level of where you're going to actually track, recording drums at home is not really for most people, unless they are already a recording engineer. It's not going to really sound that great. It's a lot of gear you got to have to buy. It's much more efficient to either program the drums or go to a recording studio. So, but one level up from the technical proficiency it takes to do pre-production, you get to the level to where you can track guitars and bass at home. One level up from that, you can track vocals. And this is only due to the fact that we can reamp our guitars and bass if necessary, which is something I can talk about now. Because it is very difficult to get a really good mic'd up guitar sound out of a guitar cab or a bass cab. It is difficult to do that, especially to work with 2 mics at the same time, have them be in phase. It is quite difficult to do that. But it is very possible to do the actual recording part yourself, and then you basically record the DI signal, the direct signal out of the guitar, and then you have a professional recording engineer reamp the DI track through some good amplifiers in a studio. Oftentimes the mixing engineer will do that for you. It's a extra step, but that's, and then also, of course, even if you were going to be recording your own guitar tone and you were going to be doing a lot of experimentation with different amps and all that, by recording a DI track to be used later for reamping, then you have this insurance policy. Basically, you can keep reamping until you get the miking of the cabinet right. So basically, the way this works, and a lot of people already know this, but the basic way this works is you take your guitar. Let's say you're a guitar player. Same thing for guitar or bass. You take your guitar, you plug it into your audio interface, which has a mic preamp in there, and a line amp and a mic amp in there. You plug your guitar into the audio interface. You set the level good. In the computer, you get a guitar simulator plug-in. That's the way it's pretty much done today. Free one or buy one or whatever. Just good enough to where when you play it, it sounds pretty okay. It's not going to sound as good as a mic'd up cabinet and all that, but it'll sound okay. You put that on, you get your tone out of the guitar simulator, and then you record your parts to the click or to the pre-produced drums, and you punch in, and you get your performance as good as you can get it for the whole song. But the guitar simulator program is not actually printing to tape, so to speak. It's sitting on top as a plug-in on top of your direct track. What you actually recorded was just the direct track, just the clean sound out of the guitar. That's what you're recording, and that's what you're keeping. That then you can later send through an output on your audio interface into what's called a reamp box, which is a transformer and impedance matcher. And then you can go from that into an amplifier. And then you can mic up the amplifier and capture the sound again. And there's a whole, you can easily find all kinds of information on that. And I've talked about it and written about it. But so you can do your guitar tone, you can do your guitar performance, your guitar tracking at home if you're conscientious enough to record well, to punch in, and to change your strings often, which is very necessary. Change your strings every song or two songs, depending on how fast you play through songs. But, I kind of, the general rule on changing strings is maybe you can put 5 hours of playing, maybe 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours of playing onto a pack of strings before it starts to get dead. You'll hear a difference. And so I pretty much tell bands to get a pack of bass strings. Depends on how fast the bass player. If the bass player can just track through a song, get through a song in 20 minutes, then you could do, say, 5 songs with 2 packs of strings. But or if you're you can easily, if you're putting together a song and it's complex and there's a lot of punching in, you can get bass strings to start deadening out after one song. So you got to change your strings often. You have to tune incredibly often. Every time you punch in something, you have to basically check the tuning. And check tuning, retune, constantly tuning, always doing that. So, but if you're changing your strings often, if you're tuning like crazy, and your guitar is set up, in other words, it's intonated, and this is incredibly important that you take your guitars or bass to the luthier and have them set up with the strings you're going to use, and have the instruments intonated. If they've already been intonated recently, then they're probably still fine, and you haven't changed the gauge of strings you're using, okay, it's probably still fine. But yeah, that's very important. Very important. And if you have two guitar players, both guitars that you're going to use either have both guitar players play with one guitar, or have one guitar player do both sides, or have both guitars intonated by the same guy. It's very important. Bass is a little bit easier. You can, so a lot of times a bass will be intonated from the factory, and if it's not too old, it'll still be good. And you could even go up maybe or down a half step, or usually down a half step, and it won't really change it. But probably it needs to be intonated. So you're doing these things. You're tracking, you're punching in a lot, you're tuning all the time, you're changing your strings frequently, your guitar's intonated, there's no buzzes coming from the electronics, because the jack is broken, and you never got, when you're at the luthier, have them fix all that stuff. And so guitar tech, whatever you want to call it, you can do your recording at home that way. And you can do it with very, very, very little equipment, a $200 audio interface, a $60 recording program, and a pair of headphones. And if you want to do the reamping yourself, well then, yeah, you're going to need, at least one SM57 microphone and a reamp box. It's $100. And most reamp boxes are all, about the same. They'll all work fine. So then, and bass, a lot of times, bass is what you record direct out of the bass is often a large part of the tone. Sometimes you mic up a bass cabinet, and that will be, maybe 50% of the tone, and then the DI track will be the other 50%. But a lot of bass in a lot of styles is just the direct sound. So basically, you're not going to be able to reamp it later and improve it. You're going to want to make sure that the bass you're using sounds great. If you got some cheapo Ibanez or ESP cheapo $200 bass, it's probably going to sound like cardboard, and it'll probably never sound great. So if you can borrow a bass, if you can borrow some kind of, something that's maybe, I don't know, $800 or more, then you're probably going to get a good sound. And just, put new strings on it, make sure it tunes up good, and it'll be good. And so then it all depends on how you're playing, right? Vocals is a little bit more complicated, because vocals, there's so much nuance, there's so much detail, there's so many little minor things like getting plosives in the in the tracks, or sibilance, too much sibilance in the tracks. So you're talking about mic selection, you're talking about mic position, and a lot of times cheaper microphones that the home studio, home recording artist would buy are going to be not sound so great. I've actually been doing some research on cheaper vocal microphones, and there's a good selection of relatively inexpensive vocal mics that will get a professional sound. The Rode NT1, R-O-D-E, Rode mic, an Australian company called Rode, and they make one called the NT1. Not the NT1A, but the NT1. It's probably about $250, and I think that would probably be fine. The Audio-Technica 4033 or 4050 was always, you can buy them used, probably for about the same price, maybe $300. Maybe $400 for the 4050. There's a bunch of others. I mean, the Shure SM7, which is a big broadcast mic, but it needs a nice mic preamp. It needs more than just an audio interface. But so then you need a pop filter. And it's best to record vocals with a compressor on the way in. And this is another thing that kind of gets in the way of recording pro vocals at home is you don't have to record with a compressor on the way in, but it's better and it will sound more professional. Even if you compress in the mix later, it is, just a second, it's better to compress also. So so the vocal chain is a good condenser mic with a pop filter properly placed so that you're avoiding plosives and sibilants, with the gain staged properly so that it's as loud as it can be without peaking. And then it is going into an analog compressor, and they get expensive because a cheapo compressor, a $200 compressor, sucks. You might as well just record without one. And you can record without one. Totally fine. But it's better to have one. And then so maybe you're having to rent a compressor. You're looking for something that's $600, $700, $800 to start on up to a few $1,000s. The distressor, the Empirical Labs distressor, is kind of the one that would be, the one single channel vocal compressor that would just make it would just be all you would need. It's about $1,200, $1,300, something like that. You can rent that easily. But and then from there, then you're going into your audio interface. And then you're talking about the quality of DA converters, digital to analog converters, but I'd say most, like the Focusrite, the red Focusrite ones, or a lot of other audio interfaces are going to have a good enough, AD conversion. I said DA, I think, but AD conversion. And that would be fine. But then you have to do your gain staging properly. And now you're getting into real audio engineering. So this is where people will do pre-production at home. They might even track guitars and bass at home, but then they'll go to the recording studio to do drums and to do vocals and have that person mix and all of that. Once you get to the level of professionally recording vocals with outboard compressors and all of this, then you're at the level of, intermediate level recording engineer level. And, my advice here in this area is kind of, you're kind of now, I'm talking at the basic, at the beginner level, at the musician level, where you're mainly a musician, but then you have to do recording as, to some degree as part of what you do. You can, but it's not as functional to just depend on a professional recording studio or another person for all of your recording and pre-production needs. So pretty much every musician needs to have some level of ability to do these things. But vocal recording and drum recording is now where you have gone into a higher domain, and that's for a different audience. We can have that conversation too. It's for a different audience. So that's the whole spiel on all of that, and I didn't talk too much about gear because really gear is not that important after a certain level. There's very, very, very cheap gear like by companies like Behringer and stuff. There's gear, there's condenser microphones and audio interfaces that you can buy for $100 each. I'd say stay away from that. But when you go to the next level, like I keep mentioning Focusrite, I don't have one right here, but every company that offers like a 2-channel audio interface, USB or it's not FireWire anymore, but USB or Thunderbolt or whatever it is. At that level, something that's about $200, $250, $300. You're going to get quality that's probably fine for most people, and there's no reason to start arguing over it. There's just like tiny little minor differences and stuff like that. We're talking about pre-production. We're talking about doing some things at home, and but still, I tell you, you give me if I know how to use the program, you give me a decent microphone. You can give me a dynamic microphone like a SM58 or something, and even without a compressor, and a decent audio interface, and good pair of headphones, or little $300, $400, like there's these little JBL, I don't remember what the model number is, but 6-inch woofers, JBLs, and like $400 for the pair. They're amazing. You could record a pro album on those now because they have a like DSP built in, and your room matters, but these are all things that we can talk about at other times. But you could give me, let's say, like I'm using Mac, and the Mac audio program is Logic. It's $200. You can give me a Mac laptop, a $500 used Mac laptop, Logic, a $200 Focusrite Scarlett audio interface, a pair of $100 pair of headphones like Sony 7506s or something. They're not the flattest or most accurate, but they're good. And give me those. And what else? A reamp box, $100 reamp box, passive one. An SM57 microphone. What does this all add up to? It adds up to like $800. Add those JBL speakers for $1,200. I could have a whole studio, everything I would need, and I could record. If I used tune track drums or something, I could record a pro album. And I would say to myself, "Oh, it'd be good if I compressed this vocal with a compressor on the way in, or it'd be good if I had this or that." But honestly, I could get everything the way I want it. I could put it out. I could record a pro album or a pro song with $800 worth of stuff, and even less. I could buy stuff used. I could spend $500. I get $500 worth of stuff, and I could record an album that sounds as good as quality, better in quality than a lot of stuff from the 70s, 80s, even 90s. So gear doesn't really even matter after a certain. It's about experience. So that is, I think, for now, a whole spiel. And let me get this. Let me see now if anybody has asked any questions. And I got to use this thing actually. See, to read this little phone. Melissa wanted me to tell people some of the bands I've worked with. What's best way to learn those programs? Yes. So, bands that I've worked with. Most people know me from my own band VILE, but I've worked with a lot of extreme metal bands: Origin, Decrepit Birth, Deeds of Flesh, bands like that. I've been mainly mastering over the last decade, and I've mastered many hundreds of extreme metal releases. A lot of Unique Leader stuff, and just a lot of underground metal, you would say. But Embryonic Devourment, it's another one I mixed. There's a album I'm pretty proud of that was Bay Area kind of classic metal band from the Bay Area called Ruffians, and their last album, Desert of Tears, I produced that one. But and then I got Bill with us on Zoom right now, so I think we might end up talking to Bill. But I also wanted to answer Melissa. And what is the best way to learn these programs? Well, okay, good point. Here's one. Now Bill's on here, so I might as well say this. That so when when I started getting into audio engineering, me and Juan Artiaga started doing this together in the mid 90s. And at that point, we were at the level of recording. The science of recording music was at what they call the project studio level, where there were still studios were using reel-to-reel tape, but then you were starting to see these digital audio or these digital tape recorders like the Alesis ADAT, or the Tascam had one, and then you later went to hard drive units. But these ADATs, these tape-based, they were VHS tapes, and they recorded digital audio on a VHS tape. That was starting to come in the that came in the mid 90s, early 90s, mid 90s. And so with that, you could, I mean, they were expensive at first, but then they got down. So, but for $5,000, you could have a 16-track studio. And so that we were still, money was still keeping people. It was still really a serious endeavor to actually build a home studio. It was going to cost you, 15 grand or something like that. Now, like I just said earlier, you could build everything you need for $1,000 or $1,200. You could get what you need. So I'm just going to mute you just for a second, Bill, and then you can come back in. But because as an audio engineer, I'm of course very OCD about extraneous noises coming in from the side there. I'm just going to say this one thing, and then we'll talk to you. But we were you to learn this stuff, to learn audio engineering. You were either working, you either did it by building a studio yourself, and just, you're reading a lot of manuals and you're reading a lot of books, and there's a lot of classic books on recordings, or you're interning at another recording studio, or you have another recording engineer who's mentoring you somehow. Now, with YouTube and all of this, you have a lot of people who are learning engineering just by watching videos on YouTube. And what we find is that on one hand, it's fantastic because there's so many people teaching for free online, and you can just go into YouTube and type in how to use a compressor, how to record vocals with a compressor, or whatever it is. You can find people talking about this. And you'll get some good advice and you'll get some bad advice, and you'll kind of have to do some experimentation and figure it out for yourself. But you get that. But what people are not doing is they're not getting the formal, basic audio engineering education, right? So they're not learning about acoustics and room modes, and they're not learning about signal to noise ratio and gain staging. And they're not really, it takes, do they even know what they're doing with the compressor? They're turning the knobs and something seems to be happening, but what is it? I'm not sure. Just going to settle on something good. Or they're not learning how to tune drums, for example, which is its own thing. And you have to learn how to, if you want to do this at a certain level, you have to learn how to do that. They're not learning how to get good monitoring, or they're not even aware that your monitors are more important than, besides your microphones, they're more important than anything else in the studio. Your speakers are the most important thing, and the room. Actually, the room is the most important. The room and the speakers are equally important. Then you get into microphones, and then you go from there. People aren't learning the fundamentals. And so they're kind of getting thrown into this whole thing, and they're like, oh, I got this program and all these, I just set the faders how I want, but they're not even really realizing, oh, okay, so, how do you stage the gain on a mix, and how do you build a mix, and how do you get the tracks to work together and all of this. And there's a lot of basic formal education, and what are the differences between types of mics, and what's a cardioid and what's a hypercardioid versus an omni, and all these kind of things. This is the basic education that you get. And so I've noticed that a lot of people are just, they don't want to do that. They don't want to study that. It's like, that's busy. That busy work. It's like studying. It's like going back to school. That's boring. That's not as fun. But it's kind of like, I mean, if you will learn the fundamentals, if you will get yourself, if you'll go on Amazon and get yourself one of these good old books. I mean, there's the Master Handbook of Acoustics. There's another book by the same guy, F. Alton Everest, about building recording studios. And there's books by Bobby Owinski and other people on recording and mixing, and there's all these old books from the 70s, 80s, 90s on microphones and on audio engineering and everything. If you get some of those, a handful of those books, and start studying those, and then start tweaking knobs with knowing what you're doing, there's a certain level of audio engineering where it really gets into being technical, and it gets into the level of real, like, electronic and electrical engineering, right? Like circuit design and that kind of stuff. And you will run into that level of where you're like, oh, okay, I go any further. If I keep studying what's in this book and they're telling me all about, acoustics or whatever, it's getting into a domain that's like too mathematical. It's really out of my league. When you get to that level, you can kind of stop. But you need to get up to that level to where it's kind of like you don't have to learn algebra, but you need to learn basic multiplication, division, subtraction, addition, that kind of thing. It's kind of like that. So how can people learn these programs, she asked, or how can people learn any of this? I would say first start with those basic audio engineering books, and you can just go on Amazon. You can kind of search around and read the reviews. You can find stuff. The stuff that's from the 90s, 80s, or 90s, which it might have been updated in the 2000s, but you look at the copyright and you look at those things and you look, you just start doing some web searches, you'll find the good books. And you get those books, and then addition to that, to learn the programs, the actual audio programs, then yes, you're probably going on YouTube. You're probably learning a lot of this from people on YouTube, and you're reading the manual, because every program has a manual, and some programs have additional manuals that third parties write, like How to Use Reaper by Joe Blow, and he doesn't work for the company, but this is a book that he's selling. Then get those books too. So there are those kind of books plus the manual, or for something like Logic, it's like just all online. It's not even a real book, but it might be also. But anyway, that's how you do it, and there is a certain, I mean, if you're just at the musician level and you want to do pre-production, then you want to do pre-production, then okay, you don't really even have to get you don't really have to go that far. But when you want to go to the next step, you want to start recording guitars and vocals and stuff like that at home, then yes, you need to start reading the books and that kind of a thing. So I was going to switch over to Bill, but he just dropped off. So, if that is, let's see if there's anybody else if anybody else has any other questions. This is the first Zoom, this is the first Zoom call that I've done this is the first Zoom call I've done on audio engineering, and I've done some Facebook Live Q&As, but it's been maybe, 5 years or something since I've done one. So this is the first one I've done, and if you see this later and you want to get on one of these, I'm going to have a URL, which is always going to be the place where you can go to get the Zoom link and the time and date of when I'm doing these. I'm not going to do them probably every week or anything, but I'll do them periodically. So it'll be imperialmastering.com/Zoom. I'll always put it there. I'll put these Zoom calls. The link to the next one will always be there. I will also send out on my mailing list anytime I'm going to be doing one of these. And so if you want to get on my mailing list, you just go to imperialmastering.com. And right now it's at the bottom of the homepage, but it'll be somewhere conspicuous. I'm redesigning that page. That I'm going to have a new website up by next week, because the current one is, if it takes a while for it to open up, I'm having issues with the server. And so, but there will be a link to the mailing list, and you can just join the mailing list or email me through the website and say, I want to be on the mailing list. However you want to contact me, I'll put you on the mailing list, and then you'll get a heads up every time we do these Zoom calls. And then you can always contact me, email me, text me, 925-305-1616. Your questions, your comments, whatever you want to talk about, and then I'll write it down, and then we'll address those things next time we have a call. So that'll be all for now, and thank you guys for hanging out, and I will see you next time.